Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast for an episode that couldn't be more timely. My guest, Josh Berry, is a comedian, impressionist and satirist. Though as you'll hear, he's not hugely keen on that third label. If there's anyone that can help us to understand human risk, it's someone who's really good at observing human behaviour and making us laugh about it. I first discovered Josh last year, thanks to videos he released on social media which went viral. If you've seen them, you'll know that he's very funny, does really good celebrity impressions, and is very sharp-witted. If you haven't, let me give you a quick introduction to Josh's most famous comic creation, Rafe Hubris, who features heavily in our discussion. Rafe is a 25-year-old SPAD, short for Special Advisor, to the current UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. The construct Josh uses for his Rafe videos is really simple. Something newsworthy, usually ridiculous, has happened in reality, and Rafe is on the phone providing strategic and communications advice to whichever government minister has got themselves into trouble. The comedy comes both from the storyline and Rafe as a character. The surname Hubris is very apt to describe the incredibly self-confident, posh, entitled Oxford graduate. We know he studied at Oxford because he never ceases to tell us. If you've never come across a Rafe, congratulations. Just imagine what a younger Boris Johnson must have been like. Since releasing the videos, Josh has written and published Rafe's 2020 diaries and is in the middle of a tour. Given recent events in UK politics, Rafe is also regularly to be found on social media. I wanted to get Josh on the show because I thought he'd have some interesting things to share, and I'm absolutely delighted that I did. Because what you're about to hear are incredibly thought-provoking insights from someone who really understands humans and the risks they pose. A word of warning to those with sensitive ears or children in listening distance. The episode does contain a number of expletives. Please enjoy my conversation with Josh Berry on comedy, impressions and satire. Josh, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Christian. What a thrill.
It's an absolute thrill to have you here. And as I was working out how to introduce you, I thought, well, comedian, satirist, how would you introduce yourself?
Comedian I think is pretty good. That's sort of a nice broad categorization. People throw the term satirist out there, and I don't know if I love that one, to be honest. I guess what I'm doing is I try and use irony and stuff to take the piss out of things, but really I'm just trying to make people laugh. So I think comedian is the best descriptor. I just worry that I've met people who call themselves satirists, and there's a little bit of sort of, masturbating to a mirror image of yourself that evokes. And if satire is supposed to be about bursting pomposity, I mean, obviously I am very pompous, but I don't want to present as such. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I get it. I think it's probably a label that does fit, but I can see why you wouldn't want it.
I guess I'm trying to elevate myself above other people, which is ironically exactly what I'm mocking people who call themselves satirists for wanting to do. But what is art if not an opportunity for narcissism?
And if we go back, I mean, how did you get started? I'm guessing it's through being able to do impressions.
I actually don't think. You know what? I used to, when I was a kid, I used to do all these like characters and stuff, and at like school, I used to do that a lot, and I used to love it. And I think I used to see this this like Scottish nurse character, who was like a bit kind of fucked up. And it was kind of based a bit on Mrs. Doubtfire, I guess. Like as an 8-year-old, it was kind of. But I used to love it. I used to love making my teachers laugh and all of that stuff. And then when I was a teenager, I was sort of a bit quieter and more like introspective and stuff. But then I started doing impressions. Yeah. So, but I think characters have always been my dream, and impressions seem like an offshoot of that, but fundamentally, like occupying a character is what makes me feel like really alive, and I have a great time doing.
And so how do you when you're looking at doing impressions, and I'll come on to the character bit in a second, how do you sort of decide whether you can do one or not? Is it just anything's fair game, we'll have a crack, or are there
Are there little things that you suddenly go, oh, I can use that?
Sure. There's always got to be sort of sufficient motivation. I think my vocal range, you have to know, like, there are certain limiting factors, right? So, like, I have a specific vocal range, so I'm quite good at doing voices that are sort of like mid to high pitch, like male voices. When it comes to really low male voices, because I've only just gone through puberty, so that's a difficult thing for me to do, and maybe in a few years' time I'll be able to do it, or maybe not. I don't even know. There are some people who have, like Steve Coogan, for example, has a very deep voice, so is good with, or like the impressionist and voice actor Simon Lipson is a similar example of that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's got to be within your wheelhouse broadly. But yeah, I'd say within that, anything's fair game in principle anyway. You just need to sort of spend enough time listening to the voice. But sometimes you have ones that kind of are loading for years and years and years. Like I had that with Russell Brand. It took me so long because he's quite a complicated voice. He's got sort of like 5 or 6. Because like on his podcast and that, there's that sort of like that voice, the very sort of high and like theological symbolism and that. But then, back in the noughties, he sort of had that. Oh, I don't know, mate. I don't know what I'm doing. It's a little bit breathy like that, and sometimes like that. Whoa, so there was plenty of different textures and things that to sort of get with him. So that took a bit more time. But yeah, broadly, I mean, as long as there's sufficient financial motivation, I'll do it.
Andy Murray is a fascinating one, and that I think was your sort of breakout, partly helped by him. I wonder if you can tell that story a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I started doing I always used to do that as a kid. Wimbledon was on. I used to learn to do the tennis players and make my mum laugh. And my mum's always quite good at telling me whether she rates or doesn't rate the impression I've done. So she'd be like, "Oh, that's not good," or whatever. And over the years, kind of just refined those, and then put them online and. Mad. The tennis community really sort of ate that up, and within a week it was like the video had like 300,000 views, which doesn't sound like that much, but I think at that time, certainly as a schoolboy,
that's insane.
Yeah, it was pretty mad, and Djokovic shared it and everything, and then kind of a few years later, like I went to uni and didn't really think I was going to do any of that, but a few years later I met Andy Murray and. He's great, man. He's such a good guy, and we did a clip together which he shared on his social media of like if him started talking to me like that, and I was like, how are you feeling for Wimbledon? And we were like, yeah, I mean it's great, all of that, and yeah, that was super fun, and then kind of from there I started doing more stuff, and the good PR boost that gave me allowed me to sort of create a career out of this farce.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes because it is absolutely crazy. If you listen to it, you genuinely struggle to tell who's him and who's you.
Oh, that's very kind. Yeah, I mean, I'm just such a fan of his. So I think years of I love tennis and watching his career, and like I stayed up to watch him win the US Open when I was 16. It just years of that had just meant that I sort of I downloaded that voice into my head, and so I could just totally speak in it. It's funny though, after I did a gig for his foundation, he sent me a letter and he's like, thanks for coming, it's really great. Just wanted to say, reluctantly, I want to congratulate you on your impression of me. In brackets, I'm told it's very accurate. Which is great. Dude, their whole family they're great. They're really fun and so not how they're very unfairly depicted as being, particularly Judy and Andy. So yeah, I mean, I can't speak highly enough of them.
Yeah, because he's sort of the last person you would expect to do that, which is why I think it made it even more amazing. If you picked, I don't know, like Boris Johnson or something, you would sort of see him expect him to riff with that. But someone like him,
the irony is the opposite would be true, right? Like, like I think he comes across brilliantly. I think he's had such a hard time in the press for no good reason. Like, and it's sad because like when he came out on the tour, like he was being really funny and wry and dry, and then he got burnt by some fucking journalists who just completely twisted what he said, which I just thought was really just super unfair. And but yeah, I mean, no, he's funny. He's really funny. His episode with Rob and Ramesh on Sky is hilarious. But, I mean, and I think anyone for whom somehow the jury is out on him should watch that, because he's fucking super funny in that.
And moving from sort of doing impressions of people to creating your own characters, how does that process work? Have you got a voice in mind, or have you got a character? How does that start?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's sort of organic. You don't even really think about it. It just sort of happens, and then in hindsight, you sort of trace all the steps back, and you're like, oh, okay, that was what that was. I think, if you can start with the voice, that's always good. Or start with a sort of scenario. I mean, if I think about how Rafe formed in a very specific scenario, which was working backwards from a fairly tone deaf PR move that Michael Gove did to, tweeting about Stormzy's. He tweeted Stormzy's lyrics back at him. He's tweeted specifically, "I set trends, dem man copy," when Stormzy was slagging off Boris Johnson, and I was just like, "What the fuck is that? Like, why have you said that, you idiot?" And I just thought, what kind of tone deaf moron would advise something like that? And Rafe was born. But yeah, I think the thing with the character like that is you realise you've sort of squirreled away a lot of details that you can then apply, and then they move a little bit and they change, but they become sort of a more fully fledged human. But I think as long as you have that initial premise, like with Alan Partridge, right? That Alan Partridge was created from the concept of a man saying nonsensical things over sports commentary, right? That was literally it. But obviously now he's not even in the domain of sport. He's a character that's fully fledged and is an actual human being and all of that. So yeah, I think you just have to sort of get that initial thing where the character can be born, and then you can hopefully take them on a journey and start really adding interesting different bits into who they are.
Are you consciously going out and watching TV shows, or this sounds a bit stalkerish, but walking the streets and looking for examples of these things, or is it all coming from just past experiences, naturally evolves?
I think the ones I've done so far are probably just from like people I've observed or people I've hung around. But I think, but also elements of me as well. I think it would be very disingenuous to say that there aren't bits of me and Rafe. There are, certainly in the book, there's plenty of me and Rafe, or Rafe and me. What an image, God.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But, the Bristol Raver, I definitely had a phase of my life where I was like that, for sure. Like a middle-class kid, sort of embracing counterculture and in a very cringe way. With probably quite extremely left-wing beliefs that I hadn't thought about necessarily for a while. So yeah, there's, I think a lot of character comedy for me anyway is just looking back on variations of yourself and sort of laughing a little bit and being like, God, that was a bit silly, wasn't it? You know what I mean?
So it's kind of like, it's almost like a therapy process for you then.
Sure. My life is an ongoing therapy process, yeah.
Right. It's just you're doing it in public, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really interesting way of putting it. I guess that is true. It's like I'm sort of monetizing my own self-awareness and consequent self-loathing. Yeah, well, it's not it's just sort of, I'm just very cynical, and I extremely cynical. And so that sort of lens that I apply to other people is equally applied to me. Like I will look back at myself and be like, oh my, what were you doing? Jesus Christ. So yeah, I think there's a relationship there between sort of elements of me, and I'm kind of waiting for time to move on a bit so I can hopefully create a new character who's another version of, I think probably the next one would be some sort of cringing metropolitan liberal elite, self-eating woke person, which is certainly what I am now. But there's something very funny about that, and I think there's something interesting to sort of take the piss out of it, because I think that could be a profitable area.
How far can you push it? Because one of the things that's fascinating is that all of your character, for character to be believed, there has to be an element of it that's realistic. And you can then push it, because clearly if it wasn't grounded in realism, it probably wouldn't connect with people. But how far can you push that? And how do you think about the limits of where you can take the character, or does it just come naturally and there's not a thought process in that way?
Well, no, I mean there definitely is a thought process. It's a really long considered thing. I mean, I think that it depends on the forum, I would say, with a lot of them. So for example, Rafe in the book, there are certain things that it's necessary to do. Like for me, I thought it was necessary to make Rafe likable, you'd have to get out his vulnerability, and you'd have to have him have his heart broken, and you'd have to have him have a cold family and whatever, and have a really, really damaged relationship with emotional expression, right? And vulnerability has no relationship with vulnerability. So that specific format required that sort of thing. But on stage, Rafe talking about his vulnerability is inauthentic, right? Because it's frontward facing. So, someone like that would never be like, oh God, I mean, sometimes I get a little bit sad, or I don't really know if anyone likes me. That would never happen. So,
right.
But the way that you make him likable in that context is by like taking the piss out of the audience and being condescending and, being funny, because that is an enormous charismatic tool, and it gets people out of a lot of trouble in a lot of instances, right? So, my response would be that it does depend on the format. But regarding what you say about realism, I mean, it's a fascinating one, isn't it? Because I always feel like the mark of good character comedy is where people in the first kind of 10 seconds go, yes, I know exactly who you're talking about. Ha ha ha, that's fucking great, right? But equally, you want to make sure that people know it's a joke. And I sometimes look back on earlier Rafe clips I did online and think, actually, I should heighten that contrast more, because you can wring out more comedy by just even with the voice. Like, I feel like with time I've lent into the voice more, and it's funnier for doing that. Like, the more you do, like, yeah, like that is just inherently. And also, I meet these people all the time, and they genuinely do. Like, so yeah, I think I'm constantly learning, and he's sort of constantly evolving in really small ways. And as you put him into different formats, hopefully he develops that bit more and that bit more, and you move from there.
And what happens when you meet their real life equivalent, or you sort of touch a raw nerve with someone because you've gone a bit too far?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that the concept of upsetting people in comedy is as old as comedy itself, isn't it? And there's a fascinating and very complicated relationship between pleasing people, which is arguably one of comedy's skills, and also having the integrity to be willing to upset them. And those are two very like foes and things that need to be kind of balanced constantly. And I think we're seeing that a lot. Like, I think one of the best things you can praise a comedian for is being fearless. Like, I think when someone calls a comedian fearless, for me that is like one of the highest bits of praise. But equally, you have to be aware of how it's coming across to your audience and the real life effect of the character and who the target is and all of that sort of stuff. I think that the thing about Rafe on stage is that it's obviously a joke, right? So if someone genuinely went away from one of my shows and was I would sort of be like, well, obviously it's not, like, I don't mean, well, but then it's like, why, because offense is taken, not given, right? The classic Jimmy, well, it's not Jimmy Carr says that, but obviously that's just a point of philosophy. It depends what they'd be offended by. Would they be offended by me saying offensive things as Rafe with a veneer of irony? Maybe there's some legitimacy to that. Maybe sometimes irony shouldn't allow us to get away with saying the completely objectionable. But equally, that is quite a good framework to say things that maybe you couldn't say as yourself, and that can be quite interesting artistically. Or are people, is it conservatives who come to my shows who are upset because it's a bit of a piss take of them, or whoever perceives it to be about them? I haven't really found that. To be honest, those types of people who've come are pretty good at being like, oh yeah, I'm a bit like Rafe, ha ha ha. And they're pretty good at laughing that off and laughing at themselves. And it's an interesting one. Like, I respect that self-awareness, and I respect that ability to laugh at oneself, because I think that's really essential. I mean, that's what my tour show is predominantly about. How we can't. There's a real pomposity that's kind of working its way through society, in my opinion, and that's a real danger, because it makes life fucking intolerable if you're horrifically. You can't be like, oh yeah, I am laughable in this way, because we all are,
Yeah, and it's I mean, I've done quite a lot of looking at the court jester as a sort of interesting construct, because you look at that and you say, well, you've got monarchs in a position where they could do ridiculous. So they need somebody to kind of calibrate what they're doing. And it's done through the mechanism of comedy. And it occurred to me, actually, a lot of, particularly where you're, with Rafe, for example, where you're talking about the establishment and you're fulfilling quite an interesting function. which is sort of, yes, you're making people laugh, but you are also kind of making a serious point around some of the things that are going on, and perhaps not necessarily highlighting it in terms of people didn't know that was happening, because you're taking a real life situation and kind of rolling with it. But you are acting as a form of scrutiny. It's almost like the function of the way the press ought to be if it were a bit more critical.
Sure. I mean, that's kind of you to give me that praise. I think the reason that's happening is not because I view what I'm doing isn't changing anything, right? Like, it's more just because that seems like a sensible thing to hang Rafe off, or because something that's been done has pissed me off or whatever. But it's honestly, it's just purely for the art perspective. Like, I do it because I think it makes good comedy, and it's like well researched and sort of clever, and people are like, oh, that's a good take, or whatever. But it's kind of harks back to what we were saying at the start. I think the problem with people doing satire is they can get very, very over enthusiastic and over excited about the impact that they think they're having on the world, and really, I think very often it doesn't change many people's minds. Satire, like, you just end up like, if you thought it anyway, you're going to just think it after the sketch.
Right.
If you didn't think, you might still laugh, but you're not going to necessarily change your mind.
Right, you're not going to be shifting votes at the ballot box.
Sure, and that's not really my role. I'm just trying to make people laugh. But yeah, I mean, it depends what you think satire does. I mean, for me, it seems like it's like ridicule, like it's about pulling things down rather than sort of building them up, if that makes sense. But I guess that's where it comes from. There are so many elements of the Conservative Party or Boris Johnson's conduct or whatever that I just think are so laughable. And I'm just like, I quite like the idea of just repurposing that and showing people that I think it's laughable, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And let's come on to that, because I'm absolutely intrigued as to how you pull together a Rafe sketch. So something happens, and I've got to admit, I find myself now I see something ridiculous in the news, and I'm waiting to see if you bite.
Yeah.
And I recognize that sometimes it'll be because you've got other things to do.
Sure. And
maybe you can't. But how does that work?
Yeah,
in terms of your thought processes.
I mean, obviously, in lockdown 1, I didn't have anything to do, so I was just I was biting all over the place I was like a shark. Whereas now, I'm annoyingly, I'd love to I genuinely, if I didn't have other interesting projects, I would love to just sit and just follow the news obsessively and just come up with all this, because it's a ride. Like, it's fun. Like, it is really, when it's like breaking news and you're constantly kind of on the precipice of the present. It feels super exciting. The process tends to be like, something will happen. I'll be like, oh, that'll be fucking great for a Rafe. Or it might be that maybe there wouldn't be an angle that I could use for it from Rafe, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what it's all about. It's like, where would Rafe be, and what would his angle be on this specific thing? So, for example, the Peppa Pig thing, everyone was going mental about, right? Like, and a lot of the mainstream press were like, even on Anton Deck on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out Here, we're all going, oh, ha, 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 Boris Johnson, he's forgot his words, what an idiot. And I just read that, and I thought very hard about that, and I was like, it's just a fucking distraction tactic, surely. Surely it's a distraction tactic for the social care reforms they were pushing through. So I guess sometimes Rafe is like an opportunity for me to just be like, look at how clever I am, everyone. I've thought about things and I know stuff. You know what it's like. That's why people are high achievers. They want to.
I wouldn't know about that, but I get that that's the case.
You're being very bashful. You shouldn't. I know you're educated, Christian. You shouldn't say that. But it's true. I think that's the high achievers curse, right? You're like, oh, I want people to recognize how clever I am. So there's probably a degree of that in it. But yeah, sometimes it's just funny. I mean, sometimes there's quite a broad spectrum for Rafe videos. So, like, some of them are like, I've got a political opinion or an opinion about kind of what's gone on behind the scenes that I'd like to express and imply that they've been sly or whatever. And then other times it'll be like, just funny, just like when the Hancock stuff happened. And it was just funny. It was just funny, the idea that Rafe would phone up and be like, Hancock, you absolute bloody scoundrel. Like, so yeah, it kind of depends on on the event that's taken place. But that's the advantage. He's quite easy to position in lots of different ways, and yeah, it's been fun kind of exploring that. But equally, like, it's been more, well, it's very intense, but it's been more fun writing the book because, you know, there's only so much you can do on social media in that format, in the sort of 1 minute. You know, I do a rhyme about Boris Johnson's penis probably at the start, and then I finish with some sort of gag, and then we're out, and in the middle I do some stuff. You know, that's fine, but it's also like a bit dull after a while. And the thing with the book that was cool was it was just like, you know, I can create an arc here, and I can build the character, and you know, I can just throw in all the jokes that I want to throw in as well. So yeah. I mean, I would hope to sort of bring him. I would hope he continues to exist beyond just social media in a current setting.
Because I thought it was fascinating the way you took, and I think that, you know, the format is very clever, because it sort of doesn't, you know, from a tech perspective, very low tech. It's very easy to do, but it plays quite well to the way we all consume media, and it sort of, you know, it's riffing off real life events. So it's got cover. Taking it to a book is a whole different step, and I must admit, and I said this to you before we were recording, I was like, oh god, he's writing a book. This could go horribly wrong.
Sure.
And actually, you did a great job, I think.
It was so funny is that's nearly all the Amazon reviews. I'm like, fucking hell, I thought this was going to be shit, but actually it's good. And, which is nice, and it's good to see my family on the internet. No,
they're not buying the book; they're just leaving reviews.
Sure,
right?
Sure. I was actually disappointed the other day because I tried to leave Rafe's review to his own book, and it was like, you know, I think this is fucking classic. Great work for me. I'm a fucking champion or something. Oh, and also more gags than a BDSM dungeon in this book. It's definitely fun. And Amazon were like, we think this is inappropriate. And I was like, oh,
you haven't read the book, have you? Clearly, right?
So Bezos, you wanker. That's what I say. Sorry, there was a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, it was about the transition and how you sort of went about that, because on the one you're starting off with very short snippets, which you can go into having to create a full backstory and deal with a whole range of things and sort of build that character out, I guess.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the process of doing that was I basically sort of became an historian of 2020. That was sort of what I hung it off. I hung it off all the main factual events. And obviously, like, I'd been very on top of the news throughout 2020, but I'm clearly nowhere near the level that I needed to be. So I spent like 2.5, 3 months, like, going through the Times and the Guardian and, you know, BBC and all that, just like trying to get all of the major events. And I made this massive timeline with everything, and, you know, and then worked out, okay, what's happening at this point in the year, and then where's Rafe going to be in this point in the year, and then from that sort of scaffolding, I was able to kind of build more of his character, take him on a bit of a journey, hopefully by the end make him into a bit of a slightly nicer person, which I hope comes across, and yeah, just sort of, you know, borrow lots from my own life, which I think plenty of exaggerated things from my own life that were funny, like the breakup bit is like a sort of very exaggerated different version of kind of how emotionally I processed my first breakup, I would say. And there's all kinds of stuff in that, and also about, you know, young male emotional repression, and, you know, I hope it comes across in that book that I actually don't. I think on Twitter people think I hate people like Rafe, and I actually don't at all. I think people like Rafe are very complicated, and they have some very interesting, charismatic, fun elements, and they also have their vulnerabilities. And I sort of look at that from a, you know, with a sense of sympathy, and I try to sort of get that across, that he's got some objectionable beliefs and ideas and enforces some objectionable things, but in many respects he is just sort of a victim of his own situation, and he can't really be any other way, if that makes sense.
And I mean, it struck me that the interesting bit is he's clearly very smart, right? So he's very good with wordplay.
Sure.
And I was chatting with someone about it, and he said, actually, he'd probably do a really good job in reality. Because he sort of, the ideas that he can, there's occasionally times where it's clearly ridiculous, but there are lots of ideas and suggestions that come up with. So you sort of look at it and think, actually, here's an intelligent person who's not afraid of saying how intelligent he is, but you can see in the humor and in the sort of decision making and recognizing, that sort of, if you look at some of his reactions to things that have happened, there's some good political analysis in there. And so two questions on that. One is sort of that presumably is intentional, and where do we draw the lines of that? And then the second bit is around, have you ever thought about doing that role? Well, we'll come back to that second.
Have I ever thought about being a spad? That's hilarious. Yeah. But okay, let's come back to that. I think, but I mean, Rafe obviously is clever. Like, there's no debating that. He's received a world-class education, but I think he's supposed to be a bit of a piss take of the specific type of intellect that places like Oxford produce. And it's, I think, quite a fair rip of that, because obviously Oxford is an elite institution that creates good, clever people without, and it admits and also produces very clever people. There's no doubt about that. But for me, Rafe represents the worst aspect of Oxbridge, in that he is yes, clever. He's undoubtedly clever, but he's also phenomenally lazy, right? And he doesn't have any of the rigor that I think if he did have, he would be impressive and all of that. So yeah, he's bright. He's not an idiot, but he's also interestingly a fool in many other respects, right? In terms of his emotions, in terms of his sort of attitudes towards women, in terms of his awareness. I guess maybe that's a good way to think of him. He's clever but not aware, and also is so self-satisfied that inhibits his, ability to do the job competently, or at least, but again, I sort of view Rafe as like a mini Boris Johnson.
I was going to say, because that's always struck me.
That's how he's supposed to sort of. That was certainly initially how he was supposed to come across. Like he's like very, very bright, obviously, but also just phenomenally self-satisfied and thinks he's the dog's bollocks. But yeah, it's a piss take. We venerate Oxford and Cambridge as institutions, and this book, among other things, is supposed to be a little bit of a side eye, being like, well, okay, but actually they're not. The education model there isn't as brilliant as everyone maybe thinks, or at least as a lot of people at those institutions maybe think. And I think that deserves a bit of a stab, because I think we overpraise those institutions sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting because and there's one particular degree, right? It's the PPE degree, which you use brilliantly as a joke play on the other kind of PPE that's there, which has produced some interesting characters, should we say, that I'm not necessarily sure have always aided society in the right way.
Absolutely, and it's not, it's just a very specific style of teaching, and it's a very specific sort of course and set of ideas that you're taught. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of good things, like the encouraging you to be mentally agile and all of that sort of stuff. But that's a blessing and a curse, because if our politicians are like unbelievably mentally agile, then you end up with people like Boris Johnson, who are so bright and clever and able to divert the question expertly that it stops him from sort of adhering to scrutiny. So I guess I'm just sort of trying to tease out some of the problems with something we hold so dear in society. And I wouldn't class myself as a satirist, but if you're doing satire, that is surely what you're supposed to do, right? Like that stuff. That stuff is the most essential for me. And I think, having gone through that personally, like, I'm well equipped to sort of say what is a little bit silly about it, or what is a little bit overpraised about the whole thing.
Have you had people making what I think is a complete misunderstanding criticism of you, sort of going, well, you're part of the system, how can you criticize it?
Yeah, sure, but I mean, that's fine. It's fine to criticize me for that. I think in the study of religion, people talk about this very often. You call it the insider versus the outsider problem. And the idea is that the insider doesn't have completely novel observations to make because you're too. And I think that's an analogous point to this, right? And Frankie Boyle says it about satire. He's like, oh, satire is just someone within an establishment critiquing certain things that are said in a very establishment voice. Chris Morris says something similar, where he's like, you give a nice dissection of how things are in the Orthodox elite, and lo and behold, you get patted on the back by the Orthodox elite who say, "Jolly good, can you do us another?" And he's like, "That's not what it's about." And I think that's true, and it's not, like the thing is, it feels a little bit unnuanced to be like I'm part of that, because I'm not in Westminster, I'm not part of that group. I've seen that group. And I'm trying to sort of mock it, as best I can. But again, it's like the reason that I know so much about that group is because I've been so close to it. I've probably lived within it for a bit. I don't know. But it's an interesting area. I don't think it nulls the force of what you're trying to do necessarily. But yeah, it is interesting. To what extent does it compromise it if you are the thing that you're mocking? I wouldn't say I am the thing I'm mocking. I'm probably quite close to it, but I wouldn't say. Yeah, but then equally, like, you can have an outsider's perspective on the elite, and that can be very interesting and also valuable. And but I think people can be a bit snobby about stuff like that. Like, if it's funny and interesting and reveals stuff that has good insight, then for me that's kind of enough. And I think both outsiders and insiders can have reasonable comments and things to say. But I think with all of my characters, I view myself as having like a fleeting sort of encounter with them through varying points during my life. But certainly now, like, that's not who I am or how I live. I'm an arty wanker now, so I'm certainly not Rafe. But I think that's what I think. I think that you have to come out of that in order to be able to mock it. So I view myself as an outsider from that, even though I look very much like that type of person and have lived that type of life, because it's in my past. So I feel like I can look back on it and kind of mock it in the same way that with the Bristol Raver, I feel like that's in my past. Like, I don't go to raves anymore. So I can mock that because it's no longer part of who I am. But if I were doing that whilst I was also living that type of life, then maybe that would undermine it. But I don't know. Twitter and people online in the UK, they love an aha moment, don't they?
Right, oh, got you. Right.
You're the thing. Haha, that means it's not funny now. I take back all my laughs. And you're like, oh, fuck off.
And I watched it, and there's a little bit of me that was thinking, we have similar backgrounds, and the bit I was thinking about was actually their but for the grace of God. Now, I don't believe I would have got, but there was potentially a path of going into politics that I sort of very briefly toyed with, and I think the experience of university taught me that wasn't for me, and has now been confirmed, I think. But is there an element of that where you sort of look at it and go, which brings me back to that earlier point around, do you think you could do that, and would you be any good at it? And my sense is you could and you would.
Well, that's very kind of you. I don't think, but again, it's like, it's like mental agility, right, that allows you to bluff through a lot of these decisions. And fine, I have that, which is why I can mock it, because I sort of understand how these people's minds work. But I don't think I would necessarily do a particularly good job. I think the job is quite hard. And I think it's very easy for me to sit here and mock it. No, I mean, I'm very, it would never be something I wanted to. I mean, I've got big reservations about comedians in general doing stuff actually in politics, because I don't think that's your role as a comic. You need to be there to sort of make people laugh, and sure, you can teach them something as you go, and you can put serious points into that context of comedy. But the first rule, without a shadow of a doubt, is always be entertaining. Because if you're not entertaining, then you've lost your value. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an area that I would be able to be constructive in. I can be destructive in it, and that's very fun. But constructiveness would be a struggle.
I mean, the counter argument might be you wouldn't do a worse job than certain people in those things.
Well, it's weird because I get told so much by journalists or whatever who I know who'd be like, oh, literally, like, you have no idea how on point this is. Like, I'll occasionally take the piss out of a policy directive or whatever in Rafe's voice. He'd be like, oh yeah, let's do this, great idea. Oh, why don't we do this? Why don't we make coke legal or whatever? And like the number of people who I'm told actually believe that is mad. It's mad.
And I read somewhere that you've been told that the videos have been played to government ministers with differing responses.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't really know how I feel about that because, I don't set out to for them to like me. I'm critiquing them, but I don't. Yeah, I don't want to upset anyone with anything I'm doing necessarily. I'm just, just trying to be, funny as I say. But it's a weird thing. I guess it's kind of cool, but also in that specific instance, it's such a sort of heavy topic you're dealing with. I don't know how sort of starry-eyed I do feel about that because it's like, yeah. But it is quite funny also, the idea that Matt Hancock maybe watched and was upset by the video of me pulling Matt Cock in his hands.
But I sort of, one of the things I think is interesting is the stuff that you pick, right? Is something ridiculous has happened.
Sure.
That's generally the construct is something absurd has happened. You sort of a health minister has decided to film a video of him walking down the high street talking to people, which sort of looks ridiculous, right? Yeah. And so you decide to burst that bubble. Yeah. And so a part of me goes, I get the point of, you're not setting out to really upset people or character assassinate them. But on the other hand, right, all of the things that you put out there are driven by something they have done. Sure. And something that, in order to get the comedy, objectively, there has to be something a bit fucked up by what they're putting out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, and that is, it's fun to mock that, but it's also quite easy to mock things because I think, it's very easy to create like a straw man out of someone's position and ridicule it. I think that very often, if you're trying to actually take someone's point at its best version of itself, that for me, that's like that's like kind of the opposite of what I'm doing. I'm just trying to look at these people doing things that look ridiculous, and then be like, oh fucking hell, that's so ridiculous, haha, and then everyone laughs together because of that mutual feeling.
Because we have no choice.
Yeah, but also that mutual feeling of everyone like, oh bloody hell, yeah, what have they fucking done now? It's that sort of like collective groan, and I guess the humor kind of helps us get through what people widely perceive to be a farcical set of leaders.
So you've written the book, and obviously you're doing lots of things like talking to people like me and doing interviews and signings. You've also got the tour on. I mean, you must be incredibly busy at the moment, which makes me even more grateful that you're here. Yeah. But how does your life sort of look in terms of all those things?
Sure. Well, between the touring, the book, and all the cocaine and the sex party, I don't have much time. It's good. It's it's insane. It's bizarre, to have come out of lockdown, and suddenly this enormous wave of work has come out, and all of these opportunities to be creative, and suddenly playing way bigger rooms than I had played before, and all the bloody money. It's great. I've had my it's been good, but it's a real privilege. It's a real rush, and I'm kind of I kind of maybe need a bit of time just to sort of reflect and decide what it is I'm going to do next, because it's all just kind of rushing past, which isn't bad. I like living fast paced, but the tour's been good. The tour has been, I've sort of done the first half of it, and then we're doing the second half through kind of 2022. It's been good. It's been great to do Rafe on stage. I was a bit worried it wasn't going to work, but it absolutely has worked, and people love it. And there's nothing more fun than ripping the piss out of people as Rafe. I love doing that on stage. He's it gives me a model to be rude to people. Because when I'm doing stand up by myself, that's not really how I'm very it's kind of ironic given what I do, but I have this massive fear of upsetting people. And when I'm myself on stage, I hate the idea of being rude to someone. So I can't. Whereas when I'm Rafe, I'm suddenly free to just be as obnoxious and to just let out this horrible prick that is really actually probably me.
But But that's a really interesting model around giving yourself permission to sort of let rip at things in a way that you couldn't possibly do because you're too polite.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very like polite and avoidant and all of that, and probably quite. I was described recently in the Telegraph as slightly bashful, which I think is probably quite a fair description of me actually. But as Rafe, yeah, I mean, I can just let out all of the jokes that I find funny, but I'd be too worried to sort of say as myself because I'd be like, oh, well, how will people perceive me? And oh, I don't want any of that. Whereas like the joke is that Rafe is, well, he's not a total asshole. Like he's a bit of an asshole, but he's also kind of likable. And, you know, people, even though he's dreadful, he's also kind of funny. And, you know, but plenty of people would go for a beer with Rafe because he's kind of amicable as well. And so, yeah, no, it's good. It's that framework that just allows you, I feel like it just allows me to be funnier as well. Because like everything I do has like comic justification. Whereas sometimes as me, I'm just being me. I don't have that separation between what's funny and what's just me as a human. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Are you that? I'm always fascinated by that sort of filtering process that we, you know, and one of the reasons I you know, a long time ago I thought I fancied a career in radio, and then I just thought I would never be able to stick to the rules about what you can and can't say, and that's everything from swearing through to kind of, I don't know, just losing it a bit or sort of looking like an idiot. And I just thought the stream of consciousness that sometimes goes on in my brain, you know, connection between brain and mouth doesn't have many sort of speed bumps. Is that an issue for you? Or?
I think that's good. I think I'm quite like that, or at least as I've got better on stage, it's because I've just allowed myself to just trust what comes into my head and then just express that. And, you know, with enough road miles, is that a phrase? Yeah.
Literal and metaphorical.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Really, really literal. My Christ. But it's, yeah, with enough of those, you get to the stage where, like, you know, your brain will come up with a joke and it'll just come out your mouth, and that's totally fine. So I think it's kind of learning to trust that more than anything else rather than bear it. But then, you know, sometimes that does go wrong. I did a breakfast radio show this morning and I finished the show by talking about dogging. I really shouldn't. But the problem was I couldn't turn off the, like, if anyone ever says anything about a dog and you're on stage, like the classic joke is, oh, dogging, and always gets a laugh, always. Any reference to group sex, people love it. But I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that actually on a breakfast radio show.
Got to go back and have a listen to that. But I'm just like, but I think there's an interesting thing there, and I was around sort of, you know, you need to let it out, so to speak, to be creative.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that whole process, and like I find that. Yeah, because if you've got a lot of repressed thoughts, right? You've got a lot of stuff in your head, and like, you know, and you feel like ashamed or guilty or whatever. I don't know what I think about that one, because on the one hand, I'm like, that's really artistically interesting. If we're just talking about, let's say, like me doing stand-up, right? That's like a really interesting artistic conceit. Like, what's stopping you from just being authentically yourself and whatever? But then equally, I've had times where I've gone through therapy and I felt much less inhibited by repression and shame and all of that kind of stuff. And as a result, in many ways, feel like I've been a better comic because I've been able to sort of focus a bit more on what it is I'm trying to say and maybe be a bit less apologetic. And it's really difficult because those are two radically different types of shows and performances. And I don't actually know which one is better. I know which one I feel better during. It's the one, you know, post therapy. But I don't know whether letting yourself free, I mean, that's good, but also maybe sometimes keeping yourself pent up has artistic value as well. I don't know.
Right. And when you're in the Rafe sketches, the videos, right? How much of that is scripted and how much are you winging it?
Oh,
I guess,
yeah, I mean, it's totally scripted. I mean, the vocal kind of accents, if you like, will be, so me going, yeah, and all that. That's obviously kind of, I'll do that for as long as I feel like it's funny. I go on like Rhyme Zone and I'll be like, oh, what rhymes with, what was the one I did for?
Oh, you see, I thought that was all coming from your house. It's brilliant the way he does this.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I do. I just write them first, but it's still totally from my brain, so it is still brilliant. But I think, yeah, as long as you can sort of be creative and make it clear that, people aren't going to know what the rhyme is, and then when you've done the rhyme, people are like, oh, that's how he did it. That's nice. What was the one I did for the Peppa Pig? It was using a French word. I remember it was like
affreux and de.
Oh yeah, affreux. Yeah. The use of affreux, like no one's guessing that affreux is going to be what rhymes with, whatever word it was before. So yeah, like I script those and then kind of just do a bit of ironic agreement with, oh yeah, no, I mean that seems like a great idea, mate. Yeah, sure, no, definitely do that. Yeah, people will love it. Yeah, so it's like a sort of paint by numbers thing, which was kind of, to be honest, what made me sort of run out of patience a little bit with doing it online. Like, obviously I still do it, and it's fun when a particularly fun thing happens, but it just felt a bit like, especially having done the book and the tour show, it's like I want to take Rafe to an interesting place. And once you've kind of gone to that interesting place with the character, you don't really want to go back to where you were. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's almost like sort of puberty for the character, and you started to form him a bit more. And actually, this small little box on the screen, it's interesting because it seems to reflect what you were saying about your own past. It's sort of that's his past. And we can, but that's been formative in terms of where he's going now. Yeah. And so now that you've fleshed the character out, that feels a bit two-dimensional.
Absolutely, that's precisely it. That's precisely it. It feels like I've already. I mean, for me, social media is excellent for that. It is excellent for building an initial character who's a bit rough around the edges and a bit kind of crude in some respects, and then as time goes on, you can really kind of make them. I know what Rafe thinks about everything, right? Like I know what underwear he wears,
and he will have views on absolutely everything, right? Because why wouldn't you?
But you know what he's doing on a Friday night. You know what chat up lines he uses. You know everything. I tell you what brand tennis racket he uses. Like everything, right? But you have to know that for the character to be good. It's like that. That's just the stuff with Alan Partridge. That's why Steve Coogan is a god, and I'm in awe of that, and I'm constantly like looking up to him as a sort of. In terms of that work ethic, that work rate, as far as creating a character goes, like when there's that bit where Steve Coogan's got two like calf skin gloves and he's going like that and bringing his hands together. That is it's a tiny detail, but it's just that's exactly what all of this needs to be, because they have to be a living, breathing human being.
Wow. Well, unsurprisingly, Josh, time has just flown, and I want to say to you first a huge thanks for appearing on the show and being such a great and insightful guest. There's a ton of stuff that I'm going to listen back and reflect on some of the things, because I think you've really pulled out some interesting nuggets around humans. I've learned a lot about your process. Yeah. And look, thank you so much for being a real light in lockdown, because I think you every time you put anything out, I knew it was going to be good and would make me smile. And I think that the biggest compliment I can pay you is that I watch your stuff time and time again, and the book again was something I read in one sitting and will happily read again because it makes me laugh. So,
oh my goodness! Well, that is so flattering and lovely. I'm also so impressed that you could do that in one sitting. I don't think I could read 10 pages in one sitting. That's really impressive. You inhaled.
I was on a train journey from Munich to London, so it was not like the shortest thing ever, but nonetheless, right? I did have other options, to be clear, wasn't it?
Well, that's very kind, and thank you. It was a real it was a fucking slog. So I'm really pleased you enjoyed it, because it was intense. But thank you, man. Yeah, I'll keep producing stuff, and hopefully it's still good.
Now, normally at this point, I close out the episode and tell you where you can find out more about my guest. But once Josh and I had recorded what you just heard, he said, anything else you want to ask? And we just kept talking for so long that there's enough for a second episode. That'll be out very soon, wherever you found this. In the meantime, please do visit joshberryofficial.com to find out about Josh's tour, Rafe's 2020 diary. I particularly recommend the audio version, and to get on his mailing list. Do follow Josh on social media. Given recent events, Rafe is incredibly busy. Links to all of those things are in the show notes. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. I'll be back very soon with the next episode featuring Josh. But in the meantime, stay safe, keep a check on your hubris, and thanks for listening.